All right. I think we're about ready to start again, folks. So, welcome everybody to Springfield, Ohio. I almost said Missouri. I actually grew up just up the road from here, but I've lived in Missouri basically my entire adult life. I'm sure you guys have heard of the Ohio State Buckeyes. I'm not a big sports fan, but you cannot grow up in Ohio and not like the Buckeyes. I don't know why that is. And you'll see this logo, and sometimes you'll see a leaf in here too. That is not cannabis. That's a leaf from the Buckeye plant, which looks something like that down there, and that's actually the Buckeye itself. And the joke is that Michigan likes to tell about Ohio State. They say, you know what a Buckeye is, don't you? Just another worthless nut, because the nuts aren't edible. I can tell that joke because I'm from Ohio. All right, so this is me. I started a YouTube channel basically because I could. It was fun, something to do. It was a little outside my normal comfort zone. And, Hey Birt's a play off of Sesame Street. So today I'm talking about making accessories, modern accessories for vintage computers for fun and profit with the profit scratched out, because that's not always the case. So, whatever your hobby is or your interest is, if you're looking for a triple deuce intake for your 52 Mercury V8 or an SD card disk drive replacement for your Model 100, there's probably some crazy person that's making that today. And, I'm glad they do. And I got into it, for some reason. But, I've benefited greatly by all the stuff a lot of the people in this room makes, like Jay and Mav, and bought stuff from them to get my machines running. So, and the question becomes about why would you want to make new stuff for old junk? Well, some of that is there was only so many of certain things built. Like, what are your chances of finding an original 4P high-res board? But I got a reproduction from Mav. That's great. Sometimes you're doing kind of a modern re-implementation of an old idea, like an SD card replacement for a disk drive, so it's more convenient for transferring files. There's new ideas, like whoever would have thought of a MIDI interface for a Model 1 or a Model 3 or something like that. I think that's awesome. I am musically declined, right? I couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, but I think it's awesome. And the other reason is you're just a masochist and you want to do something that's really difficult for no apparent reason or personal gain. So you think you might have an idea, and this is kind of how I accidentally got into making and offering accessories for old computers. On the left-hand side there, you see my Ozarks engineering when I was trying to fix a Commodore 64 case that got busted up in shipping. And, that was like JB Weld on around the parts that broke. And, of course, it looked terrible. It worked terrible. And I was really embarrassed by it, and I sure wasn't going to show it to anybody. So you guys are probably the first ones that have ever seen that and know that I had anything to do with it. So, and the thing was, I have a machine shop at my disposal. And, 3D printer and stuff like that. So it's like, what can I do that would allow me to fix this? And in the right-hand picture, you see some new mounts for the bottom of the case I machined out. And they've got a wider base so you can epoxy them down and they'll stay in place, right? And because I know this isn't a Commodore convention, but cases are cases that, the screws bust the holes out. And in these particular cases, they're all busted anyhow because they weren't large enough. And So I happened to do a video about this when I was repairing the computer this case went with, and other people expressed an interest in it, and then I accidentally got involved in making new accessories for old stuff. And sorry, I lost my train of thought there. But the process, how do you go about developing this process of an idea? And doing this is kind of a specialty type of thing. You've got to, it's a niche product. It's not a mass market thing. You're not going to be the next Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk doing this sort of thing. And the questions you might want to ask yourself, will anyone but me think this idea is cool and want one? Well, right now I'm developing a board that you can put in the PC2 Pocket computer to programmatically raise the processing speed by about 60%. I think that's cool. Is anybody else going to think that's cool and want to buy one and install it? Because it's not the most difficult thing to install, but you've got to remove some components. You've got to install jumper wires. There's different board revisions, so you got to know a little bit about what you're doing and have some good soldering skills. And it may be the case that nobody else in the world would be interested in that, and that's what you get into. And so you want to start with a prototype, and I did, your normal type of prototype thing is I had the processor I was thinking about used to do this. I'm basically using a PIC processor as a programmable clock generator. And you do that on your breakout board, you plug it into a breadboard, you wire everything together, and you're doing a proof of concept on the benchtop. Yeah, this works, this idea will work, I can control the speed. And things like that, and you haven't invested a whole lot of money, and it's still relatively simple. Once you get that proof of concept down, and then you're kind of moving on to the idea of, well, how am I going to make more than one of these? Is that even practical? Sometimes it's not, and you just share the idea and say, hey, you guys can replicate this if you want, or it just might give other people ideas too. By the way, the COTS, common off the shelf, that's a term used for that type of thing. Did I skip a slide there? No? Okay. More of the process of developing the idea. If you're going to do this and try to offer stuff to people, you got to think about, the production methods. And this was new stuff to me. You've got to kind of guess at your sales volume, to know how many parts you're going to need to obtain and not have too many. Build fixtures for programming parts, test harnesses, things like that. That really helps out a lot. And when you ship something to somebody, it's going to work when they get it. And then you've got to go through the really exciting part, which is building and testing lots of boards, plugging them into the equipment, making sure it works. And then you get the really fun stuff involving with taxes and laws and marketing and figuring out how much you got to charge so you're not losing money. Years ago, I had somebody tell me they were buying something from me, and I'm like, well, this is about as cheap as I can sell it because I don't want to lose money. And he said, well, you need to make money because that benefits him. And I thought, well, how does it benefit you? He's like, well, I want to buy what you're selling. So in his mind, it behooved him that I make enough money that I want to stay in the business of selling the stuff he wanted to buy. And that made a lot of sense to me. And I've seen people in this space of vintage computers say, well, I'm refurbishing these machines, but I'm not really making any money on it. I might be losing money, or I'm making these accessories, but not really making any money on it. And so I just want to suggest, well, you might want to make a little money because that's going to keep you interested. It's going to make sure you're not losing money. You're going to keep wanting to build them. And, people like me would want to buy that stuff. So it's benefiting everybody else if you're making a little money on it and keep it interested and keeping in the business of doing that. Marketing, I am like the worst marketing guy in history. I still wish my dad was around because that was part of his expertise, and he would help me out a lot. Fortunately, we have easy, ways to build websites. There's social media. We've got, for this group, we've got the Discord server we can share ideas on, and that helps out a lot. no matter where you live in the U.S. or the world, when you start selling things, you have to deal with taxes and regulations, and no matter where you're at, all of that stinks. I'm in Missouri, which is not too bad, but I have a city business license and county business license. And I live in the city, and I have no idea if I need a county business license, but it's like $25 a year. And sure enough, if I didn't, somebody would, decide that I needed it, and I would get fined a bunch of money for not having had it. And if I sell in the state of Missouri, I have to charge sales tax. Out of the state, I don't. If you're above a certain level, you do need to charge sales tax for, the whole country, which is a much more difficult proposition for the little guy. If you're selling through outlets like eBay, they take care of that for you. If you're selling through your own website, it's much more of a hassle. And of course, a lot of you guys have probably sold on eBay, and you know about what kind of percentage they take out of what you're selling. And so you'll see people that sell on multiple platforms, and it's always more expensive on eBay. That's why, because they're going to take maybe 20% off of the top. Oh, I saw some other notes I had on here concerning the slide. Years ago, I watched a video about one of the engineers at HP in their heyday when they're doing the first, pocket calculators, pocket scientific calculators. And this engineer said, for the sales price, they would generally do somewhere around 3 times the cost of the bill of materials. And he said if it was a tight market, it might be closer to E, and if it was, if they had more room, that might be closer to pi, which I thought was a funny way to put it. But that doesn't mean that, if you have $100 in parts, you're going to sell for $300 and make $200, because that additional space there is covering your cost of production, labor, everything like that, your research and development. So it's not profit, it's just a guideline. Now, my friend I make all this stuff with, we always try to get somewhere around 2 times the bill of material for the sales price, which is enough to make sure we've covered what we have in research and development, cover the parts, and we make just a little profit. If you looked at that on a per hour basis, it's not even, minimum wage. So you're not going to make a lot of money at it. I actually, when we did the first backpacks, I did a video on this and explaining, the cost structure and everything. So here we go back to that picture again with the, the case saver. Got into it accidentally. And when you make this kind of stuff, you're going to find out that within 6 months, there's going to be 10 people on eBay that have taken your idea and copied it. And there's not much you can do about that. So here's a better idea of how that particular project improved over time. The big thing on these cases is the clips in the back all break. And in Commodore's infinite wisdom, they did not have just one case designed for this bread bin case. There's at least 6. And I found one in Australia and South Africa that was a slightly different design for the clips. But that's the only 2 I've seen of those pop up. And there's other things like the post break, and you have to sleeve those and things like that. But and the advent of 3D printers now makes things that would be much more difficult to machine possible. But some of the parts I still machine out because it makes for a better part. Some of my great and not so great ideas, what I found is no matter what you think is a great idea, sometimes other people don't agree with you. Now, this particular thing is kind of what got things started a lot other than the case saver. And this is a what got dubbed the backpack drive by another friend. A friend of mine made this, and I always just refer to him as my friend because he prefers to remain anonymous. You know, so he doesn't want as big an online footprint. But he sent me an early prototype of this, and it's an SD card drive. It works like the old Tandy portable disk drive too, for the Model 100 and 102 and like that. And the portable disk drive 2 was made by Brother for some computerized knitting machines or embroidery machines or something. And it was a really simple serial interface 3.5-inch disk drive with a very odd mechanism that would store a whopping 100K per disk, right? But compared to the serial interface and having to have another computer device there to load new programs, it was a lot better. And compared to just using the cassette interface on the Model 100, the portable disk drive was a lot better. Now, then they came out with the portable disk drive 2, which doubled your capacity to an amazing 200K per 3.5-inch. It was the double density disk, the 800K disk. So a friend of mine made this, and he just sent it to me, and he said, and I said, well, this is cool. We've got to offer this to other people. And he was like, well, he didn't want to do that. And I said, well, I'll help you with it. And misery loves company. So we did this together. It started out for just the Model 100, 102, and then he's tweaked the firmware over the years. It now works with the Tandy WP2, the little word processor, the Epson PX8, HX20, Sinclair Z88, the PC2, and basically anything with an RS-232 port. If you have if it'll run X modem, if you have a terminal program that'll do X modem, you can transfer programs. It's a pretty slick little device. So, oh yeah, I already mentioned I did a video on this device and the construction of it, and we had the first set of boards made by PCBWay. I know different people have different opinions on their favorite board manufacturer, but I've been in the business of manufacturing PC boards and running the insertion machines and putting that type of line together. And for getting just a few boards made, I was impressed by the quality. Stuff you wind up with, not just more recently, but even a few years ago when we started this, is you wind up having to pay taxes on or tariffs on imports over a certain amount, and you don't always get treated fairly by the shipping company. The first set of these we had made was not too bad. It's what we expected. The second set I had shipped by a different carrier, and I won't name carriers here, but they decided to charge twice the tariff for no particular reason, and then wanted an additional $100 to look into why they made the mistake. So stuff happens, right? And you just got to be prepared for that. This was eventually a 2-board design, which is rather complicated to build, took a lot of time. He redesigned it to 1 board, managed to fit the DB25 and the parts under it, and so we're able to do all the production in-house now. So he kind of like pre-assembles it and sends me what he calls the IKEA version, and I do the cases and final assembly and final testing and things like that. And it's kind of nice if you can do that, because I have found that people's buying habits are very interesting, because you can have the same thing on the shelf for months and sell very few, and then when 3 weeks you'll sell out. So I understand why Walmart and these places spend so much time and effort trying to study people's buying patterns so they can keep stuff in stock. And I'm not interested enough to spend that amount of time trying to figure out why that happens. It's just very curious. So, if you're trying to sell stuff, in this kind of niche market, be warned that it'll, the demand will fluctuate greatly. My biggest flop. So a friend in Canada and I went together on this project to have these connectors redone. You had to have new tooling made for the connectors themselves and the shells, because Commodore thought, oh, we'll just use a D-sub connector, but we'll only use 23 pins. And Atari kind of did the same thing with the 19-pin D-sub. And to start with, it was great. This was very expensive to have this tooling made. Even when you have the tooling made overseas, it's expensive. If you have it made in the U.S., it's 3 times as expensive. You have a minimum order for things like this, about 10,000 parts. So, we put out quite a bit of money, and everything was fine for about the first year and a half. And then the company that made these started selling them to other people and not responding to us. And that's a danger. And depending on if you're working with somebody in your own country, you have a lot more legal options than you do with somebody in a different country. And it's just about impossible for somebody in the U.S. to try to sue a company in, let's say, China. It just won't happen. It wouldn't be financially worth it most of the time, but it's just legally you're not able to do that. So you got to keep that in mind. How much you're going to invest getting this stuff made. But it was a cool process, kind of going through, getting done, learning about it. You've all heard of caveat emptor, caveat venditor, seller beware. What can go wrong? Well, the big thing is we're all doing this for fun, and it takes a lot of time, and people want their stuff fast, and you don't always feel like packaging stuff up at night when you get home from work. But that's what you got to do. Life gets in the way. It gets in the way of our stuff we do for hobbies for fun, and it doesn't seem as fun sometimes when you're doing it on purpose. Money can be an issue, buying parts, making multiple prototypes, things like that. And then you've got to worry about how that affects your taxes, and that's a whole other thing. Luckily, we've got software now that can make that process much simpler for the small guy. And finding parts. If you're trying to, some things we're trying to reproduce, even when you're trying to build onesie twosies on your own, it can be very difficult finding original parts, or it can be impossible to find original parts. And luckily, some people have started making replacements for parts that we can't buy anymore. Sometimes when you think you're buying original chips and you're ordering them on eBay or AliExpress or whatever, it's not unusual to find out they're black-topped. They've been either sanded or coated with black and reprinted with other numbers on it. I did this recently with some clock generator, scalar chips. They were from the same manufacturer and they're the same type of chip. They just were a different model, which didn't have all of the range of clock division that it should have. Even with brand new parts from mainline suppliers, you have variable lead time. They can be long. They might be without parts for 3 months, and you can have high minimum orders on things. There's a part I designed that I wanted to use lead frames, which you see a lot of times on LCDs, which is like a set of legs that go up and grip the side of a circuit board. And so you can make like dip or sip, modules really simple with that. Well, the minimum order on those particular parts starts at about 10,000, right? And there's a lead time there, and some of them are even 20, 30,000 minimum lead time. So that was just an impossible thing for a guy in his basement to do. One other note I had here: sometimes you try to use newer technology in our accessories for vintage computers, and my friend and I found out recently that in one of the RAM expansions we made that the RAM was too fast, but it would only fail under very certain circumstances. That was very strange, which we still can't explain, and just like something we've been struggling with since January. And you'll find that it's like you go back and you constantly have to revisit the designs you've made and the choices you've made, and you find out that certain people have certain problems with other aspects of, they're trying something slightly different than you did in testing. And you see why did Radio Shack have multiple versions of the Model 1 board. Well, they found out something each time. They found out something that didn't quite work right. So in that aspect, I don't feel too bad that, you know, two guys in their basements are having the same problems. But yeah, it's not once and done. You've got to keep looking at it. And then you've got customer support, which takes a lot of time. So my friend does the lion's share of the design work. We share production, and I do the customer support unless it's a question I can't answer. So this is something you got to do. Even if you're giving away designs for free, people are always going to have questions. You know, we've got email, forums, Discord, Facebook. The Facebook interface, we're trying to help people. You know, I've got like a business account set up, and the interface when people send you a question is absolutely terrible. Half the time I can't get to their question, and I talked to somebody recently, the person sending me the message couldn't actually get to it either half the time to respond to me. So documentation, you know, you try to write good documentation for your stuff, and a lot of times what you write, what you think you wrote is not what other people read. And a lot of times what we read is not what other people thought they were writing. And we're all guilty of looking at the documentation and misunderstanding it. And it's not always right. And of course we see that in the vintage documentation too. So that's something else you have to go back and update all the time. I find that a lot. I think I wrote something, or I have some assumed knowledge in my head, and it's easy to realize that not everybody understands that missing step. And you spend a lot of time on the documentation, and about 50% of people won't read it. And we as men are probably the worst offenders by far of not reading documentation. They'll kind of forge ahead into the unknown and really get stuff wrong. And you'll run into difficult people. And I finally learned to not let that bother me. And in this retro computer stuff, this is by far some of the nicest people I've met from all over the world. I can probably count on one hand the number of difficult people I've really had to deal with. So, you know, it's like real life. No matter where you go, there they are. And like I said, just learn to not let it bother me. And other people, you know, will steal your ideas. I've got things that I put out online. It's on GitHub. People could copy it, you know, code that they can use and whatever. And some stuff I don't. And no matter if you share it or don't, somebody will copy it and they'll sell it as their own. Which, you know, if it's out there for free and somebody wants to use it and sell it, that's okay. But just give credit, you know, to who made it. I think that's only right. And they'll always price it on eBay like $1 less than yours. And of course we talked about the IP being ripped off by companies you can't do anything about, which is not fun. This was a rather short presentation, I guess good for the end of the day. So any questions? Yeah.
Have you ever considered prototyping something and then going to Kickstarter and seeing whether you could mass manufacture? Do you think, you know, as an estimate of how many you're going to build?
I have not. I think there's a good case for that depending on what your startup cost is. If it's something you think you're going to manufacture a lot of, that makes sense. But then you've got to worry about when you use services like that, they're going to take a big chunk of that initial revenue. And you know, that might make it not viable for like the stuff we're doing. You know, it's like, as far as sales volume, probably our biggest seller has been the backpack drive, and we might be up to like 500 units now. So there's not a super huge volume involved. It's a lot of fun. I like doing it. But, you know, you're not going to see me hobnobbing with, you know, the jet setters.
The model would be something like the MITs. You'd offer, this is what I'm going to build,
Right.
how many people would do it. You build in the factors of the cost involved.
Right, and that there was the guy that did those. There was a lot of tooling involved in that, that too. Yeah, and that was probably a good plan because his tooling cost for getting those made was going to be a lot more than making a simple DB connector. Yeah.
How did you get the number of users who actually read the doc up to 50%?
Yeah. Well, that's a rough estimation from when I used to do other things, and I would get calls from people, and I would say, well, that's on page 9 of the manual, and it's like they had never heard of a manual before, or they're like, can't you just tell me that on the phone? It's like, well, that's why I wrote a manual, so you can read that and do it yourself. If I wanted to charge 10 times as much and have a technical support staff, that would be a different thing. But, another thing I'd like to add is I really appreciate that people have done this with, that have offered these types of devices for the hobbies I've had over the years. And even the stuff I've bought from a lot of people in this room for the, Tandy TRS-80 stuff. I'm glad there's people that do that. And, yeah.
Being a fellow YouTube star with my 9 subscribers, I don't know how many you have, but I'm way up there.
Yeah.
How much is tied to your YouTube presence? Do you think of that help? Is that a huge help for?
It definitely helps. No, I do. For most new products when we come out with, I'll do a video. It's like how to set it up and things like that, and that helps people that have already got that thing. Those tend to get the fewest views. Those types of videos. Yeah. What people watch in a video is another thing that I cannot comprehend, because I have done basically a real quick throwaway video. That's what I call it, because I'm just like stream of consciousness, minimal editing, and it'll get 30 or 40,000 views. And something I put a lot of effort into will get a few hundred.
Well, like a how-to video on YouTube for like a niche product like that is not going to get a lot of views, partly because YouTube kind of quashes some sort of, unless you make some kind of fantastical, title for it that'll catch the algorithm.
Yeah, I did.
I could be subscribed to your channel, need your video, and never get a.
Right, won't get a notification. I did one on, the 102s have those flat flex cables in it that self-destruct when you try to reinsert them. I did a video, titled it generically, "Can we save our flat flex cables? Can we save our FFCs?" And that's got a lot of views. And I've heard from people with all sorts of different equipment that, they've got older equipment and they're trying to save it and they can't get a new replacement for. So. Anybody else? Okay, awesome. Thanks.